Welcome to Leaf Status Report for January 11th, 2026. As always, we've simulated the rest of the NHL regular season 11,000 times today, with the Leafs' performances across all simulations forming this distribution. Yesterday was very chaotic, to say the least. Obviously, the Leafs played their own game, and there were 6 other games that I did mention I thought would have some non-negligible effect on the Leafs' playoff odds in today's projections. I'm going to gun through them as fast as I can in this segment, and we'll get to the very important effects when we actually talk about the table in 3 to 4 minutes. Maybe less than that if I'm actually fast today. Most importantly, the Leafs game. The Leafs managed to beat the Canucks 5-0, thanks in part to a Joseph Woll masterclass, and some pretty good showings across the board for all of the Leafs lines. Beyond that, we of course did inevitably have some less than ideal results. The Sabres managed to beat the Ducks 5-3, and the Islanders managed to beat the Wild 4-3 in overtime. Which will keep both teams ahead of the Leafs, but all things considered don't really shift the gaps that much. We, however, do also have some very nice results to talk about. The Red Wings beat the Canadiens 4-0, which we will get to a bit more when we talk about the table, but needless to say, it's closing up the Atlantic Division very nicely today. In addition, the Panthers beat the Sens 3-2. The Leafs do gain a bit of gap on the Panthers, and the Sens are not going to be something we have to worry about for at least the next couple days, maybe even weeks. There's 2 games left, I'm pretty sure. The Flames beat the Penguins 2-1, and the Lightning beat the Flyers 7-2, which is going to put both teams below the Leafs in today's projections, which, if you are counting, means the Leafs are in a projected playoff spot as of today. Yeehaw. The Leafs gained 1.39 expected points today, going from 93.19 yesterday to 94.58 today. Beyond this, based on the theoretical value of expected points I've calculated for today, I'm predicting that our simulations collectively overestimate the Leafs by only about 0.02 of an expected point, which, considering the margins we're about to see on the table, is basically nothing. As always, when the Leafs play a game the previous day, our expected points change breaks down into 4 main controllable factors plus randomness. Because the Leafs were expected to score about 1.32 points in their game against the Vancouver Canucks yesterday, and they did manage to win, we get a clean gain of 0.68 expected points from game result alone. In addition, substituting the Leafs game data from their game last night into today's simulations yields an additional gain of 0.85 expected points. We lose a single hundredth of an expected point from substituting the rest of yesterday's game data into today's simulations. And beyond that, we had 1 less overtime game per simulation today than we did yesterday, which does give us an additional loss of 0.03 expected points. Overall, based on the total expected point sums of our controllable factors, I'm estimating that randomness favored the Leafs by about 0.1 expected points less than it did yesterday. Across all seasons we simulated today, the minimum number of points the Leafs scored in a season was 72, and the maximum number of points they scored in a season was 115. That gives us an absolute range today of 43 points. In addition to this, our inner 70% interval shifts up by a notable margin. Our 15th percentile season today was 89 points, and our 85th percentile season today is up to triple digits at 100 points. That does, in addition, mean that our 70% interval's width has also tightened by 1 point, and it's down to 11 points. The standard deviation for the Leafs season points dropped ever so slightly today. It was 5.68 points yesterday, and today it's gone down to 5.65 points. Thanks to the honestly pretty close to ideal results across all 7 key games we were looking at yesterday, the Leafs managed to gain an astounding 9.2% on their playoff odds today. Yesterday they made the playoffs in 45.5% of all simulations, and today they've made the playoffs in 54.7% of all simulations. The Leafs Cup odds also go up by a decent amount today. Today the Leafs managed to win the Cup in 1.89% of all simulations. In addition, the conditional probability of the Leafs winning the Cup, given that they make the playoffs, has also gone up by a decent amount. Out of all the simulations the Leafs make the playoffs in, they win the cup in 3.46% of them. Looking at the placing distribution for today, I think this is good news. I think this is very good news, all things considered. All things considered, given that probably like a week ago, I thought it was all over for the Leafs. I'll admit that. Anyway, A3 is unsurprisingly still the most common finish that the Leafs have in our simulations. Of course, it's still far from a majority of simulations that they do snag that A3 spot in, but it is the plurality by a decent margin so far. The most important thing about this distribution, though, is pretty obviously just the fact that that wildcard tail end of our distribution continues to die out fairly quickly. I think less than a week ago, or at the very least when I started tracking placing distribution, wildcards 2 through 10 were almost completely flat, and we're now seeing a very clear fall off from wildcards, say about 7 to 10 now. I think if the Leafs win their next couple games and they, keep going on the momentum they have, we could see that taper off, maybe even reach wildcard 5 in a couple games from now. Looking at the table, we'll try and run over most of the important game results from top to bottom on the table. Starting with A2 and A3, who did play last night, Detroit beat Montreal 4-0. Which doesn't really do much for Detroit. They gain a little bit of ground on the Leafs, primarily because Montreal is a much more statistically difficult team to face than Vancouver is. So although they won by one less goal than the Leafs did, they won against a much harder team to play. So Detroit doesn't actually really gain that much on the Leafs from this, but it's not zero. What is important about this game is that Montreal loses almost 3 expected points on their gap to the Leafs, which basically closes the entire Atlantic Division in on itself. Feasibly, what I think this means is that in the next couple days, if the Leafs can keep winning a couple more of their games, they might be able to think about reeling in Montreal on our expected points table here. The Islanders and Sabres both did play games last night. Both of them had fairly narrow wins. Neither of those gap shifts I think particularly matter that much. Buffalo's because it's less than 1/10 of an expected point, and the Islanders because although it is a little over 0.6 expected points towards the Leafs. They're also sitting in M2 right now, which means they're not actually in direct contention with the Leafs in most of our simulations. Pittsburgh and Philadelphia are pretty easy. Those were just Pittsburgh was not a decisive loss, but it was a loss nonetheless against a very bad team in the Calgary Flames, and Philadelphia had a absolute walloping at the hands of the Lightning. Both have about equal results. It just chucks them under the Leafs by over 1 expected point in both cases. The important game to really talk about in terms of gaps is the Florida Panthers and Ottawa Senators. Now, I did say I wanted the Ottawa Senators to win that game by a narrow margin, but I think we're fine with a 3-2 Panthers win in this case. The margin is thin enough that the Panthers still lose a bit of a gap on the Leafs. It's a little over 0.2 expected points that they lose. And the Sens basically just see the bottom fall out of their chances of catching the Leafs in the next couple days. They're outside of 1 standard deviation now, and I don't think we have to think about them for at least the next couple days unless the Sens can go on a decent winning streak and the Leafs go on a decent losing streak. Because they're the Leafs, it's not impossible, so maybe don't hold your breath yet. We have 2 key games today, which I'm going to gun through because I've wasted too much time already. At 5 p.m., the Boston Bruins host the Pittsburgh Penguins. The Pens have an expected points yield decently above 1, which means I think we're fine with a loss in any fashion, though a regulation loss does give the Leafs a little more safety in the next couple days. At 7 p.m., the Nashville Predators host the Washington Capitals. The Washington Capitals are well above 1 expected point for this game, which means that we're fine with them losing in overtime or regulation, kind of regardless of where we want them to fall relative to the Leafs. Canadian teams, our playoff prospects are essentially Oilers, Canadiens, yes, Leafs, perhaps. Canadian teams managed to win the Stanley Cup in a little over 9% of all simulations today.